Thank you all for joining me. I live in this quiet country. Nothing ever happens. Maybe it's Switzerland, although Switzerland today voted to limit its population to 10 million, which was an interesting thing. But in any case, it's been a few weeks. Thankfully, there has not been a war. We felt like we were about to have a war a couple of days ago. That has semi-receded. I wouldn't say it's receded completely. There's still a sense that something could happen, certainly at the end of this week, going into next week, by the time the USS Abraham Lincoln comes to the area. It's not at all clear. We're dealing with President Trump, and we're dealing with President Trump. You have absolutely no idea what's likely to happen or not likely to happen. One of the interesting tidbits that came out in the last day or so was the fact that J.D. Vance supports the United States attack on Iran, which is surprising, but okay. Um, the other reports, of course, over the weekend was that Netanyahu asked Trump to hold off. It's not at all clear whether this is a true report or whether this is someone else leaking it. There is a problem. There's no question that we used up an awful lot of our interceptors during the last war. Um, we've obviously been manufacturing interceptors 24/7 since the end of the war, which is 6, 8, almost 8 months. One of the closest kept secrets in this country is how fast we can produce them. We've also sold them to Germany, so some of them have gone to Germany. The other concern, as I understand it, is during the regular part of the Iran war, we were also helped by U.S. Aegis cruisers that were in the area. They have the ability to intercept ballistic missiles, and there were two of them off our coast in the Mediterranean, plus the ones in the Red Sea. There aren't that many at the moment, and of course, the greater fear is, of course, if the United States attacks Iran, Iran, while planning to attack us, will also be attacking the U.S. Uh, assets in the Middle East, which the U.S. will have to defend. Um, Keep in mind that with the last war, we preemptively destroyed a lot of their missiles that were there to attack us. In other words, the first day of the war, the first night, we were all woken up in the middle of the night and basically told to sort of go to our air raid shelters. That wasn't really clear at 3 in the morning, but it turned out that was in anticipation of an Iranian strike that didn't occur. It didn't occur until the following night because the missiles they had planned for immediate response had been destroyed by Israel on the launching pads. So it's a question of what the U.S. is going to strike, if it strikes, how coordinated it will be with Israel in terms of tactically. A lot of open questions. There is no question in this country people will be willing to endure another round of what happened last time if it means the end of the Iranian regime. There is nothing that could better ensure our future, at least in terms of external threats. I won't talk about internal threats, than destroying the Iranian regime. The big question is, can you destroy the Iranian regime from the air? In other words, can you do enough damage that the people on the ground can gain control, that part of the army will revolt, that some sort of scenario? And that's the big question. And of course, the other part of it is, do you have a plan? And like everything else in the Trump administration, step one seems to be there. Step two, three, and four is shoot from the hip. And so the question is, what is the plan? Is there a good plan? Um, how would that end up working out? Um, Clearly, that's been the number one subject here for the last week and a half, 2 weeks. Clearly, the biggest problem, there are two sets of problems. First of all, no, there's even three. So, first of all, the question is, the Iranian people, they deserve better. We all know they deserve better. They revolted against the Shah because they wanted democracy, and their revolt was hijacked by theocrats, and they've been living under a theocratic regime ever since. Uh, they don't want to live under a theocratic regime. But what's the role of the United States in ending that? Well, there are a lot of terrible regimes in the world, and the United States has gotten out of the business of nation building and all those other sort of things. We'll leave aside the theoretical ideology of America first for the moment, but even others, America is not going around the world trying to bring democracy to the world, at least not anytime soon. However, the problem that exists here is very particular, and supposedly that's why Vance supports it, is because Trump made a promise. He told these people, go out in the streets, take over government installations, and we'll have you back. We'll be there. We're coming. We're heading your way. And of course, America wasn't heading it their way. And so that's a real problem. It's a problem in terms of America's, um, what its word is
Ability.
worth, although its word isn't worth very much when you can go and say you're going to put new tariffs on countries you just finished negotiating a tariff agreement with, but that's a separate story. But um, it's a real problem. It's a real problem because he told those people to go out and he'll be there, and the United States hasn't been there, maybe for very good reasons. And as I've written in the last couple of days, we don't really know what the exact reason is or what the exact combination of reasons. But the Israelis are as ready as we can be, understanding that at any given time, the United States could attack Iran, which means that Iran will attack Israel, which means we don't know what that means in terms of how good our defenses will be. I would say that we optimally probably need another year to rebuild our inventory of interceptors. We also have the next generation of interceptor that I think is going into production at this point, which will be a little bit better and a little bit more effective. And the generation beyond the next one is already deep into R&D. And then, of course, there's the lasers and what effect the lasers will have on ballistic missiles. The current generation probably less so, but future generations maybe more so. So all of these things we'll have to see as time goes forth. Um, you know, it's the old saying about the unknowns and the unknowns of the unknowns, and that's where we stand right now. We don't know, and what will be in that sense, we don't have a lot of control over more than anything else. Okay, um, so that's where we stand in terms of Iran. Um, we well, there's nothing we can do. We can just wait and see. The only feeling is the poor Iranian people. I mean, it looks like the lower number is probably 10 to 15,000 were killed. The upper number may be as many as 30,000. And I'm talking about
Wow.
300,000 people wounded. I mean, even in a country of 90 million, 300,000 people wounded is not a small number. And most of them are afraid to go to the hospital because they're arresting people directly from the hospital.
That's
So
crazy.
you're talking about a personal, not personal, but a national tragedy of uh, unbelievable proportions, and all because these people want saying enough, enough of this theocratic regime, enough of basing everything on revolutionary ideology, Shiite extremist ideology. So again, um, we will wait, we'll see, and we'll be ready. As much as individuals can be ready, it's really the Air Force that has to be ready, including be ready almost immediately to engage in an attack on Iranian missile sites. So that's where that major part and the thing that's taken up most of the energy here in the last 2 weeks, I guess, more than anything else. It doesn't take up a lot of energy in America. Again, when I think I wrote about it, the frustration in Israel is how quiet the American campuses are. No one seems to care about the Iranians. Be killing other Iranians, that's okay. And the Iranian state is anti-Israel, so they must be good. So they have to defend the Iranian state because, hey, they're anti-Israel, they're anti-West, they must be good. And in this today's crazy environment on university campuses and other areas of the left, um, that's how everything is divided. If you're anti-American, you're good. If you're anti-Israel, you're good. Even if you kill thousands of your own people, that's okay. You can kill your own people as long as you're anti-Israel. I mean, that's the same thing in terms of Hamas. Leaving aside when Hamas kills us, it also seems to be okay for Hamas to kill other Palestinians because they're anti-Israel. So That's very much a reality. It's hard to accept, but it's a very much a reality, and it's the reality that we live in the world. Um, and again, I don't know how we're going to change that going forward because long term things don't look too good. We'll get into that in a few minutes. I want to touch on a few other areas. I was just on the air talking about the Gaza, the the Gaza peace initiative, the committee, the executive committee that's been established, and the committee for peace, Trump's committee where he's the president of, and he has other leaders. Each one of them has to pay $1 billion to be a permanent member of this committee of peace. Chunk change to some people, I guess, $1 billion. Then there's an executive committee made up of uh, lesser than world leaders, but people like Tony Blair, like Jared Kushner, like Witkoff, like this Israeli businessman who lives in Cyprus, who no one in Israel ever heard of, but seems to be a multi-billionaire, and a group of others, including a Qatari and a Turk, which I'll get to in a moment. And then there's the actual committee for running Gaza, which is made up of Palestinians who, by and large, are Palestinians who were affiliated previously with the Palestinian Authority, but now aren't officially affiliated with the Palestinian Authority. So that's okay. And so, where do we stand with this? First of all, oh, excuse me, there's the fourth element, which is the military force that's going to disarm Hamas theoretically. Only problem is no one's willing to join this military force. So it's a military force made up of nobody right now. Uh, the big one of the issues that came up is the issue of the Turks and the Qataris being part of this executive committee. Prime Minister Netanyahu came out with a statement last night attacking President Trump for appointing the Qataris and the Turks to this committee. He has been adamant that he will not allow this to happen. There's a lot of questions whether his statement was merely meant for domestic political purposes and whether really he didn't know about it, as he sort of claims. It's a little bit hard to believe that he met with Trump in Mar-a-Lago 2 weeks ago and they agreed on everything, and then suddenly this is happening. I think mostly his statements were for domestic use, but again, we don't really know. Look, there's this inherent problem. If Israel had done what it should have done from the very beginning of the war, as Defense Minister Gallant said, a plan for the day after, and it would have included Palestinians from the Palestinian Authority to take over as Israeli troops were there. And moving forward, there would have been an administration put in place. Then the war would have been shorter, and there would be an administration that we had a significant influence on without Qatar and Turkey being there. But because of the obsession of the Israeli government in not involving the Palestinian Authority, after all, that's where Hamas came from, right? It was a balancing act to undermine the Palestinian Authority. But because they refused to include the Palestinian Authority, we kept on going back. I'm going through the war right now. I'm in the final stages of this book I've been working on for the last 3 years, and I'm up to um, I guess March of 2025. And you go through the war and you're back here, you're back to Jabalia again, we're back to Jabalia again, and we're back to Jabalia again. Why are we back in Jabalia 3 times? Because we left Jabalia and we left it so the Hamas could come back. Instead of leaving it and putting someone in charge like the Palestinian Authority, we left it and Hamas came back. And now Hamas rules all of Gaza that we don't occupy. And we may hold 52% of the land, but they hold 98% of the people. So I don't see them disarming. Our strategy was a complete failure in this war, in totality, as far as I'm concerned, both from a military standpoint and certainly from a political standpoint with Gaza. Not so much the case. We had a good strategy with Hezbollah, and we certainly had a good strategy with Iran, but our strategy for Gaza uh, was a disaster. But leave that aside, we're stuck with what we have. And people should have known really after October 7th, Hamas was probably going to remain in power because they had this leverage There was no two ways about it. They had our hostages. And unless we're willing to write off those people, which Israel wasn't willing to do, there was no way to destroy Hamas uh, unless they also did the other thing, which bring in the PA, Palestinian Authority, which they weren't willing to do from a political standpoint. It was also a question of who else is there? There is nobody else. Who's gonna take over Gaza? Once again, the Swedes aren't going to send a force in to occupy Gaza. Certainly, America maybe 30 years ago might have, but certainly not today's America, and so on and so forth. So I don't see any solution that's not going to be Hamas in control of some part of Gaza, and Hamas being a pain going forward. We have to just make sure that they don't ever become a pain like they were on October 7th, and they never managed to get the arms or anything else. And if they happen to fire a rocket, we respond by full military force. Um, but we're not going to have total victory, and that was just an election slogan. It's not happening. It's not going to happen, and there's no way to bring it about. So that's where we stand in Gaza. We have all these committees. The Committee of Peace, the one that President Trump is a chairman of, has not been appointed. The Executive Committee has been appointed, and of course, the Committee of Palestinian technocrats have been appointed. They had their first meeting and they called to develop a democratic, independent Palestinian whatever in Gaza. It sounded very good right out of the American Declaration of Independence, practically. But what that means is very questionable. What the reality of that is going to be very questionable. So we'll have to see if that goes anywhere, based on what I just said a minute ago. Okay, that's where we're going in terms of Lebanon. Lebanon, we attack almost daily Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. The deadline for disarming Hezbollah has come and gone. The reality is the Lebanese government doesn't really have the ability to do it. There keeps on being talks that we should launch a major campaign. I don't see that happening anytime soon. It might, but we're attacking pretty regularly. And I don't know, someone is saying that, I mean, some military observers say, well, they're rearming quicker than we can attack them. Well, then attack them a little bit more. I mean, you don't have to announce you're launching a major assault to just keep on attacking them from the air. And we are. We are attacking them daily from the air, attacking both close to the border, where they're not supposed to be at all, and in northern Lebanon, where they're theoretically trying to rebuild their missile forces. But they're very limited. They don't have Syria as a transit point anymore. They're limited in terms of money, whatever Iran can smuggle in. I mean, the Iranian foreign minister came for a visit, a meeting in Lebanon last week, and he wasn't allowed to take 4 suitcases off the plane with him. I assume um, the belief was there were 4 suitcases full of cash, so he wasn't allowed to take those 4 suitcases off by the Lebanese Authority. So Lebanese Authority are trying to do what they can, but they're limited. Once again, I think I've mentioned it before. The average Lebanese soldier makes like $70 a month, and the average Hezbollah person gets $2,000 a month. Who are you going to fight for with those disparities? If the world wants the Lebanese government to be free of Hezbollah, they need to start, paying their soldiers a lot more money, among other things. And it's not just that, obviously. So we have an uneasy situation up north, and I don't believe we're going to go back to war with Hezbollah anytime soon. Again, as long as we keep on attacking, and as long as we see any threat and we attack, they don't have. Before the war, there was this fear that anything we would do would result in missiles on Tel Aviv. We're no longer afraid of missiles in Tel Aviv, A, because we've had missiles on Tel Aviv and we've lived through it, but B, because the missiles from Hezbollah have been basically ineffective and have been intercepted almost completely. We have 2 effective levels of defense against the missiles from from Hezbollah. We have both the Iron Dome and we have Keller David, which is the medium range interceptor that it seems to be very, very effective. And Hezbollah, I think, managed in the whole war to get one missile that landed in Herzliya, not far from intelligence headquarters, and that was about it in terms of Tel Aviv and in terms of Hezbollah. So the fear we wouldn't touch the tent that Hezbollah built on our side of the border because we're afraid of a major war. That's no longer the case, obviously. Um, Syria, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm not, there are three views in Israel about Syria. There's the view that says this government is just a bunch of Islamists. They're wolves in sheep's clothing, and we can't trust them, and we have to do whatever we can militarily to make sure we don't make ourselves uh, vulnerable. The second group is, well, we don't know, but we should be careful, um, but we should try to make some concessions. And the final group, which I was a member of, I don't know what I am at this point, was that we should do whatever we can to embrace this government, especially earlier when they really needed us, and a chance of moving them over to becoming our allies. We have the same enemy, which was Hezbollah and Iran, and I think we could have done more um, to make them our allies instead of our enemies. Um, and the army is willing to pull out of everything, but they want to stay on the top of Hermon because of the strategic value of having a observation point on this top of Hermon. Um, but I don't know. I think it's a little bit extreme. If that's what it's going to take to reach a long-term, peace, not a peace agreement, but long-term armistice with the Syrians to move out of this new place we captured on top of the Hamon, and we don't have other methods. We don't have satellites. We don't have drones. We don't have other abilities. We have to have physically people there looking. I think that's very, 20th century. I don't really understand it, very quite frankly. But I'm not in charge of intelligence, and maybe they know something I don't. But I think the risks are more than made up of the potential rewards. And we certainly don't want to make an enemy of this regime. Of course, the issue of the Druze and making sure that they're maintain their defense and are independent, that of course is a bit of a um, bigger challenge. And so we'll have to hope for the best. Hope this government knows what it's doing. Um, it's this government is Netanyahu. There's no one else there, so just keep that in mind in terms of government. There's no security cabinet made of everybody. I'm not even sure who today's the head of the Malal, the Security Council. Um, the last one, he was fired. He left. Tzachi Negbi. He opposed some of Netanyahu's policies more recently. The new person, I don't even know his name to be honest with you, just announced he's leaving. So there is no real security cabinet. There's no, and Ron Dermer, of course, has left, who has a lot of his negatives, but he also was a bit of a strategic thinker and certainly was a political thinker. He decided to make his millions with Kushner, and he's gone. So there is no one but Netanyahu. And whether you love Netanyahu or hate Netanyahu, a country can't be run by one person in that sense. It shouldn't be run by one source. I mean, we have a defense minister who I don't want to be sued. So let's just say he was never considered the brightest person in the Israeli cabinet previously, and I don't think he suddenly changed. So I think we have a lot of challenges, leaving aside all the ideological issues and the policy issues and everything else. We have really serious challenges in terms of who's running the country at the moment. And again, you can hate Netanyahu or love Netanyahu, and you can think he's incredibly capable or he's completely whatever. But whatever, either way you want to look at it, he can't do everything, and he can't know everything. And on the other hand, he's very much like President Trump, who also doesn't have a staff. So I don't know. It's a whole other. We're in a whole other world when it comes to that. Domestically, time is sped by. Okay, domestically, we're in election year. Whether elections are going to be held at the end in October or they'll be held in May or June is a big question. The Netanyahu seems to be holding off desperately to hold off these elections all the way to October to stay out his whole term. The idea that the person who was prime minister on October 7th should have his full term in a parliamentary system is insane, but our system is insane at this point. But we'll leave that part aside. The
What?
big question is passing
Yeah.
the big question is passing the draft law, or the undraft law it's called here. And the ultra
You have
orthodox,
the one the cup that's in his uh thing now. It's fine for now.
I think that Victor muted
Just
himself.
do that one.
Um, the the law has to be passed if the ultra orthodox are going to support the budget. Without them supporting the budget, the country, excuse me, the government automatically falls on March 30th if there is no budget. Um, Netanyahu has a really dilemma here, quite frankly. First of all, he's not sure he could even pass it, even if he wants to. Between some of the ultra orthodox who think it's too strong, and the rest of the country who thinks it's way too weak and it's basically giving the ultra orthodox a pass of not having to be drafted, and some of his members saying they will revolt against him regardless. It's not clear he has the votes, and if he has the votes, um, what's that going to cost him in the next election? Now, supposedly his office did some sort of a research, and they said it wouldn't hurt him too much. The polls that I saw were that 19 to 20% of the people who would normally vote for the Likud would consider not voting if this law was passed, or voting for someone else if the law was passed. Now, 20% of his voters is more than, I mean, as it stands right now, his winning an election is not likely, very possible. But if 19% of his voters desert him, there's no chance he could possibly win, and the opposition will clearly win the election. Uh, the big question, and I think this is really where it comes down to, is not whether those voters are going to go and vote for somebody else. Are they going to vote for Eisenkot? Are they going to vote for Yair Golan, Yair Lapid, anyone else? Bennett, maybe, maybe not, probably not, but they'll just stay home. And that's really going to be the key to this election, is who's going to come out and vote. And Netanyahu is going to do all he can coming up to this election to basically, fear factor. Only I can save the country from, I'm not sure who, but fear. Only I can save the country from the Arabs in some form or another, because that's the general direction. It's only, fear, fear, fear. That's been what he's run on all the elections. Can it win this time after he didn't do such a good job? Unlikely, unknown. The question is, will his voters get come out? That's a big question. There are other issues too. For instance, just happened a few hours ago. The cabinet approved allowing Uber into this country. Now, whether you're a fan of Uber or not a fan of Uber, one of the key voting blocks of the Likud has always been the taxi drivers. Let's just say the taxi drivers are not happy this afternoon with the idea of competing with Uber. So we'll have to see. I go from being distraught to cautiously optimistic every few hours in terms of the election, that we don't know when it'll be. But it's a very important election. It's a very important election, not only in terms of Netanyahu, which shouldn't be over, because once again, it's insane that a man who's been prime minister for so long thinks he should continue being prime minister. Again, whether you love him or hate him, uh, it really, the same person being in office for so long is never good for any country, any time, and that's why the U.S. First of all, had a not a rule, but a tradition of only two terms. It was broken only once by FDR, and when he broke it once, a constitutional amendment was passed and is in place so that you can only have two terms, because there's a recognition that more than two terms, you become identified with the state, and the state becomes you, and of course, everything else flows from that. Anyway, I'm sure I didn't cover everything. I didn't cover the violence that continues in the West Bank against the Palestinians by some of the settler youth. I can answer that in if there are questions. So I thank you all, and I'll open it up for questions. Just sort of wave, and hopefully I'll see you on the system. Daz 25. Okay, I must. Okay, you're under a different name this time. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I have 1 second. Let me just
fix my thing here. Yeah, I have two. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're fine.
Can you raise your volume a little bit, by the way, because it's not coming across well.
Okay.
Good. I have two questions about Iran. One, in a scenario where if Trump did attack, Iran said they may well go after Israel. If Iran attacked Israel first, can you imagine a situation where Israel's response would be less than devastating? Where Israel would basically keep the gloves on in that situation, not take the glove. Can you imagine that?
What does it mean take them to put the gloves on? I mean, that's the question. What you listen, you have a priority of targets, right? At the moment, if we're attacked, I'm sure the Air Force has a whole list of targets by a certain priority. The highest priority is going to be to attack the missile launchers because they can do the most damage. So, we have only so many planes, and more importantly, only so many tankers, and it takes a while to get to Iran. So we have a limited number of planes that can be over the air of Iran at any given moment. We had an incredibly effective number during the last war, numbers that no one could have planned to be able to succeed in doing. I mean, it was an incredible number, um, but it's still limited. And so you have to hit the targets based on priorities. So, what are your priorities? Number one, first and foremost, missile launchers before the missiles are fired. That's your highest priority. Any facility that's helping to make more missiles, that's a high priority, obviously. Then, what about what's left of the nuclear program? Is that your highest priority? Probably pretty high there. But then, where does it go after that? Can you uh, can you eliminate the leaders of the regime? If you can, you probably go after them at this point. But they're not always easy to get people who are, in some bunkers. I mean, we managed to get everybody in Hezbollah. Can we get everyone in Iran? I don't know. Do we, we have, I'm sure we have the intelligence, but the question is, do we have the ability based on where they're going to be? Iran is a very big place. Uh, so do you take out the infrastructure? We put the whole of Iran in darkness. That would be pretty easy to do. But is that the goal? Is that what's going to help the protesters? I mean, remember, the goal would be to give help to the protesters so that they can take over the country, right? So it's just damaging the country doesn't do us a lot of good. What we need is a
No,
new
but
government there.
destroying military bases, the
Yeah, well,
Revolutionary Guard.
you got to destroy. Okay, but the problem is you got to destroy people. There's the IRG is not bases aren't made up of, with tanks and things that you can destroy easily. You have to literally destroy the secret police. How do you destroy the secret police? Well, that's a whole other question. Maybe you can disrupt their communication and totally, but then you have to have work with the opposition to kill them all. I mean, literally. So yes, Israel will do what it has to do and what it can do, but that's again, we have certain limitations. Obviously, we did very well during the last war, but there are limitations of what we can do with the number of planes we have, the number of pilots we have. Um, I think we have somewheres around 10% the size of the U.S. Naval Air Force and etc. So,
Okay, all right. And then my second question is um, regarding Iran also. Is it a feasible, logistically feasible strategy to offer amnesty to the police or whoever, aside from the top generals, obviously, but offer amnesty? Can it be pulled off? Is there a logistic way to basically tell them, if you don't defect, your days are numbered. And if you do defect, we will guarantee your safety. And logistically, there is a place for them, physical place for them to go. Can that be done?
okay, two parts to that. First of all, you have to have an agreement with the rebels, or whoever you want to call them, the alternative government, to do that to some extent, unless you want to physically take the people out of there, which you could do. You have to find a place willing to take them. America doesn't want any more refugees, obviously. So that's not a place. Maybe Russia wants some more. They need some more people. I mean, Russia's depopulating very quickly. 1 million men have lost their lives in the last 2 years. They could use some more people. Um, it's complicated, but obviously it can be done. But that's how things usually work out in the end when revolutions. You convince part of the army or part of the secret police to defect, and then you give them, immunity. But again, that has to be done on the ground to a large extent. We're not on the ground, and that depends on we don't even know if there's leadership or there's no leadership amongst the opposition. It's clearly not totally spontaneous, but my guess is there is some real leadership there. but they're going to keep themselves really, really secret because otherwise they're going to be dead. So,
So you don't, it doesn't seem to you like it's such a feasible strategy to that amnesty will succeed to get we obviously they have to defect to bring the regime down. You
right.
don't seem optimistic about that.
Well, I don't. I mean, again, it's one way. It's the only probably the only way, but it's going to be hard to pull off.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan,
Hi, yeah. I want to make a comment and then ask a question as well about something completely different. We've already sort of touched on the issue of the number of deaths, people murdered by the regime in Iran, and just wanted to make the connection that of the silence in relation to the numbers. If you take the lower number, which is not the lowest, but there's 16,500 that's been reported, to your higher estimate of around 35,000, possibly more. That is half the number of people in 2.5 years that have died in Gaza, and nobody's made that point that I've seen, and I think it's something we ought to hit home at. It's the sheer scale of death in 3 days or however
and
many
it's
it's
100%
been.
intentional, right? In other words, the
I,
civilians that died in Gaza, some of the ones who died in Gaza were clearly intentional. The Hamas fighters, we killed them. A lot of the deaths
I get that.
in Hamas in Gaza were, people who died in a bombing, and we didn't really want to kill them. These are people they wanted to kill. They machine gunned, they burned to death, all these sort of things. Yes, absolutely.
And there's little sort of comment being made about that connection, which is really tragic. And I mean, I know there's quite a lot of concern around the silence of the so-called progressives and the news media in the West around the whole scale of the death that has been inflicted. My question though relates to um, the increasing bizarre range of proposed legislation that seems to be coming out of the coalition in Israel around, ranging from, well, perhaps it's not so bizarre, but it's scary, around the death penalty for terrorists only Muslim or Arab Palestinian terrorists, not the ones on our side, to the change in the legislation of bribery, effectively, or that would get Netanyahu. I, what's your view about? I can guess why these measures are being proposed, partly to keep stupid members of the Knesset occupied with bizarre ideas, I guess. But and presumably it's electioneering. But what's your comment around how many, if any, of these are going to succeed in getting onto the statute book, and what
I'm
would be
not
the
sure.
consequence of that?
I'm not sure any of them really will in the end. And then I don't think almost any of them will survive a test of the Supreme Court. So, for instance, the one on the death penalty only of Muslim terrorists or whatever you want to call it, that will not, the way it's currently written, I think they made some changes, obviously could not survive a test of the Supreme Court. Um, Obviously, clearing Netanyahu retroactively of his crimes would also not pass. We'll forget the smell test. It won't pass any sort of Supreme Court. But that's not the point. The point is all these things is partly electioneering. The Likud, everything goes on. There's Likud primaries. Everyone in this country wishes these Likud primaries would be over already, because each one is trying to do something crazier than the other. I mean, today the Minister of Economic Affairs, Nir Barkat, um, who has done very little for economic affairs. He's a very wealthy man. He was the mayor of Jerusalem, and and some people thought he was the future of the Likud, but he's not very popular in the Likud these days because he's half normal. So to prove he's only half normal, today he offered to uh, to pay for the suing of Channel 12 by any Likud member who opposes what they say about them, and he'll pay for one of the legal analysts of Channel 14 will handle those suits. And so, I mean, he's a minister in the government. Something is purely illegal for him to even try to do something like that. But it sounds good amongst the base. And there are all these crazy things for the base, the base, the base. Now, the strangest thing is the opinion poll that was done amongst the base showed that the most popular member of Likud is Tali Gottlieb, who is this person who's beyond any pale of normality in terms of politicians, despised by most of her Likud um, colleagues in the Knesset, and yet she says these outrageous things, and the base loves it. The base loves it. At least the polls show the base loves it. The base is sort of made up of people who we have this really strange situation. The Likud has been in power for more or less 1979, 1978. So how many years ago was that? We're putting 45 years, 46 years ago, even more. They've been in power all but like 4 years since then. There was just the Rabin government, and there was Ehud Barak's government. Um, all the other years, Likud was in power, and yet they act like this minority that's been never not given any power, no ability to do anything, etc., etc. And it's the politics of grievance. Sound familiar? The politics of grievance to any of you from the United States? That's been what the Likud has been doing. Um, so we'll have to see. I mean, that's one of the reasons this government has to go before they actually do pass things that are be hard to overturn. Anyone else? Okay. Last go. Wait. Okay, go ahead, Paul. I'm glad you're back. You at least keep things going.
No, I just had to go out momentarily. Yeah, so going domestically, correct me if I'm wrong, but if there was a referendum on the ultra-Orthodox draft, 80% of the population, assuming the ultra-Orthodox even were part of the vote, okay, 80% of the population would demand they be drafted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Given that, is there any feasibility for Netanyahu to say to himself, you know, I basically have to change my stripes on this. I can excuse everything else, but 80% of the people want the draft. The war showed that we need the people. I'm going, basically all in with an ultra-Orthodox draft. Is that feasible at all, or he's so wedded to them he cannot do that?
Look, the reason the Likud has been in power all this time has to do with an agreement that was made in 1982 between Begin and Rav Shach, who was the head of the ultra-Orthodox Lithuanian parties back then. And that agreement was basically that they don't have to. Until then, there were a limited number of ultra-Orthodox youth who got out every year, and there was a limited number of people who got money. And he basically said, as long as you have to say you're in yeshiva, you don't have to go be drafted. And we're going to open the spigots. And so prior to that agreement, the rate of employment amongst the ultra-Orthodox men were the same as the rate of employment amongst the population as a whole. Now it's like 35% lower. And of course, none of them get drafted. Back then, the people in the Shas party, all of their parents, all were in the army. The current older generation of Shas members, they also are mostly in the army. Their children, none of them are in the army. I mean, so that's what's happened over these years. And the deal that was made in 1982 has ensured the fact that the ultra-Orthodox parties, except a very short period where Shas supported Rabin a little bit, and there was a short period of time where Shas was supporting Barak because of the direct elections. Don't forget, Barak was elected over Netanyahu, overwhelming numbers in the first election between them, direct election. So they supported that government for a short period of time. But other than that, they've been supporting Likud all the way through all these years, and he's not willing to break it. Look, he broke with them in the government that had Lapid as Minister of Finance and Tzipi Livni as Foreign Minister. And that government, he went in together with Lapid and Bennett and all those people. But he ended that government because he was not comfortable. He wanted a government back with the ultra-Orthodox. He made up all sorts of excuses why he had to end that government. There was a ridiculous reason ended the government. He claimed because of the law that was being pushed, it was called the Israel Hayom law, the law that would have limited the ability to hand out the free newspapers that were supporting him. So he ended that government because he wanted to be back in touch, back in partnership with the ultra-Orthodox. Understand this country has a limited economic future unless the ultra-Orthodox either stop being here or start working. It just doesn't work. When they're 5% of the population, the rest of the population can carry them. When they're 10% of the population, we can carry them. When they're 25% and growing, how does that work? You're the
He's not
economist.
willing
How
to
does that
break.
work?
No, I agree with that, but he's not. You're saying under no circumstances will Netanyahu break with that.
I don't think so. I can't
Okay.
see it. Listen, he's at the end of his career. Again, I don't understand this. Um, I do not understand why men in their mid 70s or older insist on holding on to power. I can see yeah, as someone who's keeping on working, I can understand that, but insist on being prime minister or president of the United States, two hardest jobs. Yeah, I guess, power is the ultimate, but still. Um, the United States has a big problem with too many older people in power, and Israel has followed suit to some extent. Netanyahu is not a young man anymore. He once was the young face. He is no longer the young face. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all. A public service, whatever announcement. I'm hoping to come to the States in mid-March and would be happy to speak in any communities that would be interested. I have not set dates until I have uh, one, one event planned, and then I'll plan it out from there. But sometime around mid-March is my plan. So if any of you have any interest or communities would want me to speak at, I'd love to. Um, so I thank everybody. We'll try to do it once a month. This past couple of weeks have somehow passed by for various reasons. Hopefully, there won't be a lot of news. But, you know, it's always a surprise here. I don't know whether I would enjoy living in a quiet country like Switzerland or not, but I couldn't put out a daily update about the events in Switzerland unless I talked about cows or something. So, cheese. So, I thank you all and have a great week.
Mark, will you be including the I-24 link in Tel Aviv Diary later?
I should be. They haven't, when I got on this, I didn't, they hadn't sent me the broadcast. They usually do, but I've turned off my notifications, so I haven't seen if I gotten it in the meantime. But yes, assuming I got it,
Okay,
I'll
thank you.
upload it. Okay,
Thank you.
take care.
Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you, Mark.
you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.